Hello again, Mark Ongley here to talk about abiding in the love of God. The main point in this teaching is this, that home can serve as a metaphor for understanding how to abide in God's love. The signature passage when it comes to abiding is, of course, from John 15. Verse 4, it says, "Abide in me as I abide in you." Eugene Peterson, in his translation of the Message, he words it this way: "Live in me. Make your home in me just as I do in you." And so I want to use home as a metaphor. Now, the three key points of this teaching are as follows. The gardens, that is the Garden of Eden and the Garden of Paradise, the gardens are the perfect home. The incarnation, point number 2, the incarnation was God making his home among us. The third point is that this present age in which we live, this present age is his home within us. Our church here in Beaver Falls is 3 blocks down the street from a homeless shelter. When you think about homelessness, usually you think about someone who has no structure in which to live. There's no building, no house, no apartment for them, so they live in a shelter. But if you think more clearly about it, just providing shelter does not give them a home. That depends upon a number of factors. Home is what? It's a place where our core longings can be met, at least to some degree. Our needs for security, significance, a place to be understood, a place where we belong. As Robert Frost said, home is a place when you show up, they have to let you in. And so, home is the perfect homes for us. First of all, it was the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden was a place where Adam and Eve had core longings met perfectly in their relationship with him and in their relationship with each other. There in the garden, they had responsibilities. They had care for the garden itself. Adam had a time when he was naming all the animals. These responsibilities gave them a sense of significance and purpose. They found their belonging with each other and with God, their needs for love and understanding, etc. But there are 2 elements that are involved with any home maintenance, you could say. 2 elements that maintain a home-like environment, and those elements are trust and obedience. Trust and obedience. They lived in trust with their Creator, but they were given a test, and it was Satan who came and aimed his lies to eat away at that trust and to get them to disobey. Did God really say that you shouldn't eat? He's holding out on you. He knows that when you eat of it, you will die. You will not die. He's holding out on you. So they caved in, they disobeyed, and it was the first broken home. About 10 years ago, I was pastoring a rather large parish, a parish that had, when I first arrived, had no staff, and I had to pedal furiously in order to keep up. One of the oases of that week, of a work week, was a ladies' Bible study. And these elderly ladies, they had arranged to go on a chartered trip, and they invited me. They said, "Come with us. We're going to take an all-day trip on a bus to a theater to watch a drama." And I thought, I just don't have time for this. So I politely refused. And to my surprise, the next week they said, we know you probably don't have enough money for this, so we put our money in together and we bought you a ticket. I thought, oh, great. So I took my briefcase full of work, got on the bus, and we went to Sight and Sound Theater in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Perhaps you've been to one of the Sight and Sound theaters, enormous, massive structure where they do these amazing dramas depicting stories from the scriptures. And the story that we saw depicted was in the beginning, the creation of the world, the creation of Adam and Eve, and it was so well done. And I so enjoyed those early scenes where Adam and God, they're walking about the garden together, and there's such joy as they interact in looking at all that God had made. And then, of course, Eve was made, and that increased the joy. But eventually they disobeyed, they were kicked out, and then we had intermission. And coming back into the theater, suddenly the stage looked so different because, again, it was the first broken home. And throughout the rest of the drama, Adam kept saying over and over, God, oh God, if I could just see your face again. If I could just see your face. Genesis tells us that Adam lived to be 935 years old. 935. That's a long time to miss what you lost there in the garden. But even in that Old Testament period, people still viewed, when they were walking in obedience, they still viewed God as their home. Psalm 90, verse 1 says, Lord, through all generations, you have been our home. That's the New Living Testament translation. Other versions say, you have been our dwelling place in all generations. So even though they could not see him, they still viewed him as their home, their place of refuge. Psalm 91, the very next chapter, it says, you who live in the shelter of the Most High, who abide in the shadow of the Almighty, will say to the Lord, my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. So in that Old Testament period, though they could not see the face of God, and it was before the indwelling of the Spirit became available for all of them, they saw God as their home, and there were those two key elements again of trust and obedience. As for the Garden of Paradise, with the Garden of Paradise, Jesus made reference to this in his Last Supper discourse. He had announced to the disciples that he was returning to the Father, and they were distraught. This was not in their plan. And so, some very familiar words from John 14, verse 1. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God. Trust also in me. There is more than enough room in my Father's home. Again, that's the New Living Translation. There's more than enough room in my Father's home. If this were not so, would I have told you that I'm going to prepare a place for you? When everything is ready, I will come and get you so that you will always be with me. So the gardens are the perfect home. And we await that great homecoming when we meet those who've gone before us and we see God face to face. We'll be in that place where the old order of things has passed away, and we will find once again our core longings met in such a wonderful way in fellowship with each other and with God. Let's move on to point number 2, and that's the incarnation. Now, I'm going to be much more brief on this point because certainly it's a doctrine that we're very familiar with. We hear at least one sermon during Advent and around Christmas time. The incarnation, when God made his home among us. At some point, perhaps it'll be at a candlelight Christmas Eve service, you'll hear John chapter 1 read and this familiar line, and the Word became flesh and lived among us. and we have seen his glory, the glory as the Father's only Son. Another translation says, so the Word became human and made his home among us. So as Jesus took on flesh, as he lived among us, he made his home with us, among us. And there might be a tendency, a temptation to think, if only we had lived then. How amazing it would be to have walked with him, to have talked with him, to hear him teach, to see the miracles take place before our eyes, watch him raise Lazarus from the dead, eat some of that bread as it's multiplied by his hands. That would be so much better than what we have now. But would it have been? It doesn't seem to be the case in the scriptures, because those who watched him, those who lived most closely with him, the 12, they ended up betraying him, denying him, running when he was arrested. And even after the resurrection, before he ascends, someone says, okay, Lord, is this when you're going to restore the kingdom to Israel? Without the presence of the Spirit in their lives, they were a bit clueless. So incarnation, yes, it was when God made his home among us. But in this present age, and this is point number 3, in this present age we have a home away from home, really. It's God's presence in us. Once again, that translation by Eugene Peterson of John 15, verse 4. Live in me. Make your home in me, just as I do in you. In the same way that a branch can't bear grapes by itself, but only by being joined to the vine, you can't bear fruit unless you are joined to me. God has made his home in us, in this era, in this present age. How do we abide in this place of refuge, where core longings are met, at least to some degree? Again, abiding in his love, abiding in him as he makes his home in us. It's those two key elements of trust and obedience. And we again see this in the Last Supper discourse. I read already from 14 verse 1, where he says, do not let your hearts be troubled. You trust in God, trust also in me. And then the obedience. Jesus answered them in verse 23. Those who love me will keep my word, and my Father will love them, and we will come to them and make our home with them. That's the New Revised Standard Version. We will make our home with them. Obedience, trust and obedience are the two key elements for maintaining the home that God has for us. So this principle hasn't changed. Those two key elements were true for Adam and Eve. They were true for Noah, for Abraham, who was known as the friend of God, for Moses, and down to the present time. It's trust and obedience. Abiding in his love. How does the home become a place of even greater intimacy? It's as that trust and obedience are put to the test, really. It's in the struggles of life where we're tested. That's when we are called to more closely abide in his love, and he reveals himself more clearly to us. Paul wrote in 2 Timothy, he said to Timothy, you have observed my persecutions and my sufferings in Antioch, Iconium, and Lystra. Yet the Lord rescued me from them all. The Lord rescued me from them all. I read that verse one day and I thought, what happened in Antioch, Iconium, and Lystra? And Lystra was the place where he was stoned and left for dead outside the city. He said God rescued him from them all. That's not my definition of rescue. Is it your definition? For me, rescue would be that I don't even get stoned, that there's some kind of a force field that keeps the stones from hitting me. But Paul embraced the fellowship of Christ's sufferings, and in the midst of suffering, found a deeper intimacy in that home, in his abiding in love with God. Not too long ago, about 6 months ago, I was meeting with my spiritual director and sharing with him about some difficulties in my church and how it was tweaking me. And we went to prayer. And as we prayed, God showed me a picture of a robin with pieces of dried grass in its beak. And I heard the words, "You are accepted." Now, I've never been real fond of robins. It just seems like they're everywhere. And there was a time when it seemed like there was one particular robin that was always pooping on my car. I don't think they're that attractive. I'm not a robin kind of guy. But when I saw that in the vision, I thought, okay, accepted. I don't know why robins, but okay. And I began to look at robins differently. And then just, I think maybe 3 months ago, something happened in my church that just ticked me off. I was beside myself in rage. And it happened on a Friday, really grew, mushroomed on Saturday, and my sermon wasn't done, and I could not focus. And so Saturday evening came, and I thought, okay, I have to get this out. And I just went for a walk. And I walked for hours in my neighborhood trying to pour this out before the Lord and receive something from Him. But my mind just always slid back into that rut of rage and, if you ever said that to me again, blah, blah, blah. At 10 o'clock, it was actually a little after 10 o'clock at night, as I'm rounding the corner in this neighborhood about 3 blocks from my house, I hear a robin chirping, chirping, chirping. I look up and there's a robin in a tree by the street light chirping at me, and I just laughed and said, okay, God, I'm accepted. I'm accepted. God was revealing Himself to me through that robin. And as you go through the struggles and trials of life, and you will, God will reveal Himself to you. And that is an opportunity through trust and obedience, hanging in there. He will reveal Himself to you, and you will experience the home life that He has for you. One day, as I've already said, we will have that great homecoming. Right now we're in that season of already and not yet. But one day we will see Jesus face to face. Now those questions. 4 questions for your reflection. First of all, what are the circumstances in which you find it most difficult to trust God? What are those circumstances? Are they health issues, finances, the welfare of your children or your aging parents? Secondly, what step of obedience is God calling you to take, which is challenging your faith? What step of obedience is He calling you to take at this time in your life? Question 3, what time of suffering from your past became a moment when God revealed Himself to you? What time in your past, a time of suffering, became a moment when God revealed Himself to you? And fourthly, is there an object or some kind of an action that you can carry with you throughout the next few days that just reminds you that God has made his home in you. It might be a physical object, might be just an action like putting your hand on your microphone, no, putting your hand on your heart, just to remind you, he's made his home right inside of me. And repeat that over the next few days so that you can settle into this idea that this life of trust and obedience is a way of abiding in his love.